Between 38 and 50% of people who develop the severe lung form of hantavirus infection in the United States do not survive it. That is not a historical figure from a pre-modern outbreak. That is the current documented case fatality rate published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a respiratory disease transmitted through rodent droppings, urine, and saliva that has been circulating across North America for decades, and that the mainstream medical system has never built an approved antiviral treatment for, a vaccine for, or a reliable early warning system around. What makes the number more alarming is who it strikes hardest. After 60, the respiratory immune defense layer has declined by 30 to 40% compared to its function at 35. What a younger immune system partially intercepts at the airway surface, an aging body delivers intact to the deep lung tissue. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how this disease progresses hour by hour, what your specific biological vulnerabilities are after 60, and 5 specific protective steps ranked by survival impact, including the one step almost no one takes, and the biological reason why skipping it is often what determines the outcome. After 60, 2 specific biological changes make hantavirus exposure significantly more dangerous than at any earlier point in life. The first is the decline of mucociliary clearance, the system of microscopic hair-like structures called cilia, lining the airways from the nose through the bronchioles, whose function is to trap inhaled particles in a mucus layer and sweep them upward and out before they reach the deep lung. Research from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine documented a 30 to 40% reduction in this system's efficiency in adults over 65. What a younger person's airways intercept. A 65-year-old's airways deliver directly to the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where hantavirus does its most devastating damage. The second mechanism is inflammaging, the chronic low-grade systemic inflammation that accumulates with biological age, paradoxically weakening targeted immune precision while amplifying the tissue destruction the virus produces inside the lungs. In South Korea, where the Hantan virus strain was first isolated by Korean virologist Dr. Ho Wang Lee in 1976, the Korean Disease Control and Prevention Agency's surveillance data shows case fatality rates in adults over 65 that are nearly 3 times higher than in adults under 40 across decades of confirmed cases. The gap is not explained by access to care. It is explained by the biology of the aging respiratory system. My name is Dr. Jae Yoon. I have practiced medicine for 26 years, trained in Western clinical medicine and traditional East Asian integrative medicine, and I have spent a significant portion of that career managing infectious disease risk in adults over 60. In my practice, I have seen patients attribute weeks of escalating fatigue, muscle aches, and progressive respiratory symptoms to influenza, never connecting the illness to a rodent-contaminated space they entered weeks earlier, because the incubation period is long enough for the exposure to feel completely unrelated to the symptoms. Hantavirus does not announce itself. The Sin nombre strain responsible for most North American cases was formally identified in 1993 after a cluster of deaths in the Four Corners region of the American Southwest baffled every infectious disease physician who encountered it. Its name translates from Spanish as the virus with no name. 32 years later, it has no approved antiviral drug and no vaccine in clinical use anywhere in the world. The entire clinical strategy for this disease is prevention, because once the cardiopulmonary phase begins, there is nothing a physician can prescribe that treats the underlying infection. Before we go further, press the like button right now. I do not have a pharmaceutical company funding this channel. Without that like, YouTube buries this video, and the person who needs it most never finds it. With your like, this reaches 100,000 people. And somewhere in that number is an adult over 60 planning to clean out a sealed storage space this weekend with no protective equipment. Press it now. Every week I release research your doctor has not had time to cover in a standard appointment. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And I deliberately left out one specific environmental condition that can extend hantavirus particle viability in a sealed space from days to months, something that turns a manageable risk window into a season-long one. Tell me in the comments if you want me to cover it next. I read every single one. Hantavirus belongs to a family of single-stranded RNA viruses called Hantaviridae and has been present inside North American rodent populations for thousands of years. The primary carrier in the United States is the deer mouse, Peromyscus maniculatus, which inhabits every state except Hawaii and thrives in rural, suburban, and semi-rural environments where human structures provide food and shelter. The deer mouse itself does not get sick from the virus. It carries sin nombre virus in its saliva, urine, and feces, and sheds it continuously and silently into the environment with no visible sign of illness whatsoever. Research from the University of New Mexico's Department of Biology found that approximately 12% of deer mice trapped in rural areas of the American Southwest test positive for sin nombre virus, meaning roughly 1 in 8 mice in endemic regions is actively shedding an infectious agent whose documented case fatality rate in humans sits near 50% when pulmonary syndrome develops. The Andes virus strain circulating in South America carries the additional and deeply alarming distinction of being the only known hantavirus strain with confirmed human-to-human transmission, documented in a 2019 outbreak in Argentina's Chubut province that produced 29 cases and 11 deaths. The primary route of human infection is inhalation of aerosolized viral particles. You breathe it in. When an infected rodent urinates, defecates, or sheds saliva in an enclosed space, the excreted material dries and bonds to dust particles. When that dust is disturbed by sweeping, vacuuming, handling contaminated materials, or simply moving boxes that have been undisturbed for months, those viral particles become airborne and travel directly into the respiratory tract. A 2003 study published in Emerging Infectious Diseases found that sin nombre virus RNA remained detectable in dried excreta for up to 1 year under controlled laboratory conditions at cool temperatures. This is not a virus that disappears once the rodents that carried it are gone. The contaminated environment persists long after the animal has moved on. Secondary transmission routes include direct contact, touching droppings and then touching the eyes, nose, or mouth, and rodent bites, though inhalation accounts for the overwhelming majority of documented cases. The enclosed, undisturbed space is the mechanism of exposure, not the rodent encounter itself. The structural failure of American clinical practice around hantavirus is not a knowledge gap inside academic infectious disease medicine. Every major research institution with a virology department has published on this pathogen. The failure is a delivery gap inside the appointment structure. Hantavirus risk assessment, reviewing a patient's home environment, outdoor activities, storage habits, and potential rodent exposure history, requires a targeted 5 to 8 minute conversation that generates no diagnostic billing event, no prescription revenue, and no laboratory order in the majority of cases where the answer is simply, "You have not been exposed, and here is how to ensure that remains true." The 15-minute preventive care appointment was not built for that conversation. The 2023 National Ambulatory Medical Care Survey found that infectious disease prevention counseling specific to zoonotic pathogens, viruses carried from animals to humans, was documented in less than 2% of all primary care visits by adults over 65 in the United States. Less than 2%. The conversation that could prevent the most lethal respiratory illness with no approved treatment is happening almost nowhere in routine clinical practice. The diagnostic architecture of American emergency medicine creates a second critical gap specifically for adults over 60. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome's early prodromal phase, the 3 to 5 day window before respiratory failure begins, presence with fever, muscle aches concentrated in the large muscle groups of the thighs and lower back, fatigue, headache, and sometimes nausea. This symptom cluster is clinically indistinguishable from influenza without specific laboratory testing. A 2018 analysis published in Annals of Internal Medicine found that patients who communicated a potential hantavirus exposure history to their emergency room physician within the first 24 hours of respiratory symptom onset had measurably better clinical outcomes than those whose exposure history was not identified until later, primarily because early suspicion triggers transfer to a facility with ECMO capability, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, an artificial lung support system that can sustain gas exchange while the body fights the infection. ECMO availability is concentrated in major academic medical centers. Most rural hospitals, where hantavirus exposure is most geographically common, Do not have it on site. The 12-hour window between first breathing difficulty and the need for mechanical ventilation is not long enough to locate a capable facility after the fact. Step 5, the foundational protective action, is a complete rodent audit of every enclosed space on your property this week, not next month. Garage, basement, attic, garden shed, crawl space, any stored vehicle that has sat undriven through the winter. You are looking for 4 specific indicators of active or recent rodent presence. Droppings, which appear as small dark pellets 3 to 6 millimeters long, gnaw marks on wood, plastic, or food packaging, nesting material made from shredded paper, insulation, or fabric, and the faint musty odor produced by a rodent colony's consistent urination in a confined area. Before entering any potentially contaminated space, open every available door and window and allow the space to ventilate for a minimum of 30 uninterrupted minutes. This reduces the concentration of aerosolized viral particles inside the enclosed space to a fraction of the sealed space level documented in environmental sampling studies. Do not bring a fan inside to accelerate the process. Indoor fan use increases airborne particle redistribution within the space rather than clearing it. Step outside. Wait the full 30 minutes. Step 4 is personal protective equipment, and the specific type is not interchangeable. When entering any space with evidence of rodent activity, you need a certified N95 respirator, not a surgical mask, not a cloth mask, not a general dust mask. An N95 creates a tested fitted seal against the face and filters a minimum of 95% of airborne particles in the size range that includes aerosolized hantavirus-laden dust. A standard surgical mask allows air to pass around the edges with every breath and provides no meaningful barrier against the particle sizes involved in inhalation transmission. The CDC's hantavirus prevention guidelines have specified N95 use for enclosed space entry since 1994 and have not changed because the aerosol physics have not changed. Disposable nitrile gloves prevent direct contact during cleaning. For spaces with significant contamination, visible droppings across a wide area, active nesting, a disposable Tyvek coverall prevents material from transferring to clothing carried back into the living space. The complete protective ensemble costs between $15 and $25 at any hardware retailer. Step 3 is the cleaning method, and the single most dangerous error adults make in this moment is the one that feels most natural: dry sweeping, vacuuming, blowing debris with a leaf blower. Any of these actions aerosolize the viral particles directly into the breathing zone of the person performing the cleaning, concentrating exposure precisely at the moment of maximum contact. The CDC protocol, validated by environmental health research from the University of New Mexico and the New Mexico Department of Health in the years following the 1993 Four Corners outbreak, requires thoroughly wetting the contaminated area before touching anything. The standard disinfectant solution is 1.5 cups of household bleach per 1 gallon of water, applied generously and allowed to soak for a minimum of 5 minutes. After soaking, use paper towels or disposable cloths while wearing the N95 and gloves to pick up the dampened material and double bag it in sealed plastic bags for disposal. This wet method reduces aerosolization by an estimated 90% compared to dry sweeping and costs under $3 in materials. Step 2 is knowing the exact symptom combination that requires an emergency room visit. Not urgent care, not a primary care phone call 2 days later, but an emergency room today. The critical combination is fever above 101 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with muscle aches specifically in the large muscle groups of the thighs and lower back, combined with any progressive shortness of breath, even breathlessness that feels mild and manageable, in someone who has had any potential rodent exposure within the preceding 1 to 8 weeks. When this combination is present, go directly to an emergency room and say the following words to intake staff. I may have been exposed to hantavirus. I was near rodents. Please test me. Do not wait for the breathing difficulty to worsen. The cardiopulmonary phase of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome can progress from first respiratory symptoms to complete respiratory failure in 24 to 48 hours. After 65, pulmonary reserve, the backup breathing capacity your lungs access under physiological stress, is reduced by approximately 35% according to the American Thoracic Society. The margins are narrower than the symptoms initially suggest. Step 1. The single most protective action on this list, and the one almost no adult over 60 takes, is having a direct, specific conversation with your primary care physician about your hantavirus risk profile before any cleaning, before any entry into rodent-prone spaces, and before the summer rodent season peaks in June and July when deer mouse populations reach their annual maximum. This conversation covers 3 clinically relevant points: your housing environment and whether any enclosed spaces show evidence of rodent presence, your baseline pulmonary function, because a documented pre-exposure measurement creates the comparison point that allows a physician to recognize early deterioration significantly faster than without it, and your vaccination status for influenza and pneumococcal pneumonia, which reduce the probability that a hantavirus prodrome will be misclassified as a common viral illness during the critical early window. In Japan, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare incorporated zoonotic viral exposure counseling into the annual wellness evaluation for adults over 65 in 2008, making it a standard component of preventive geriatric care that requires no specialist referral and adds under 10 minutes to a routine visit. That standard has never appeared in an American clinical guideline. The documented case record eliminates any possibility that this risk is theoretical or geographically remote from most viewers. In May 2012, 10 people who stayed in the Curry Village area of Yosemite National Park were confirmed with hantavirus pulmonary syndrome linked to rodent infestation in the insulation of the tent cabin walls. 3 of those 10 did not survive. The CDC investigation required notification of over 22,000 visitors who had stayed in those structures during the exposure period. In Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, the states within the historical endemic zone of sin nombre virus, the Colorado Department of Public Health confirmed 3 cases of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome in 2023. 2 of those cases involved adults over 65. 1 of those individuals died. The cases are not clustered only in wilderness areas. In Washington state, documented cases have been traced to residential storage sheds and rural barns. In California, to garages adjacent to open fields. In New Mexico, to homes in established suburban neighborhoods where deer mouse range has expanded alongside residential development at the urban-rural boundary. The counterintuitive claim this video is built to deliver is the one that changes where most adults over 60 believe they are safe. The highest risk hantavirus exposure environment in the United States is not a remote cabin in New Mexico or a tent platform at a national park. It is the suburban or exurban garage, basement, or storage shed that has been sealed and undisturbed through the winter months. The reason is environmental viability. Sin nombre virus survives longest in enclosed, low humidity, temperature-stable conditions, precisely the conditions that sealed suburban structures maintain through cold months. A campsite's outdoor air dispersion eliminates most aerosolized particles within minutes of release. A sealed garage concentrates them at the surface of every object inside. Research from Rocky Mountain Laboratories of the National Institutes of Health found that sin nombre virus RNA remained detectable under cooled, low humidity, enclosed conditions significantly longer than under warm, humid, or well-ventilated environments. The deer mouse's geographic range has simultaneously expanded steadily into suburban and exurban areas across the American West since 2010. Your garage is not safer than a national park campsite. For most adults over 60, it is approached with considerably less awareness and considerably fewer precautions. The most common objection to this protocol from adults who have been cleaning storage spaces for decades without incident contains an important statistical misunderstanding. Sin nombre virus is not uniformly present across all deer mouse populations at all times. It circulates at 12% prevalence in endemic regions, concentrated in geographic pockets that expand and contract with rodent population cycles tied to rainfall and vegetation patterns. La Niña weather cycles, which produce wet springs, abundant vegetation, and expanded rodent food availability, are systematically associated with elevated hantavirus case counts in the following summer months. The spring of 2025 across the Four Corners region and parts of the Great Basin produced above-average precipitation and correspondingly elevated regional rodent population estimates. 30 years of cleaning without incident does not establish that the next cleaning carries the same risk level. It establishes that the previous cleanings occurred during lower prevalence windows. The environmental conditions change with every season. The immune system, meanwhile, has continued aging in one direction. The risk that was low at 45 is not the same risk at 68, even in the same shed. 3 additional practices compound the 5-step protocol's protective effect. The first is structural rodent exclusion, sealing all entry points into enclosed structures larger than a quarter-inch using steel wool packed firmly into gaps, followed by expandable foam sealant. Rodents cannot chew through steel wool. Research from the CDC's Rodent-Borne Illness Prevention Division found that structural exclusion reduced active rodent presence in treated structures by 68% across 6 months compared to untreated controls. This eliminates new contamination rather than managing it reactively after contamination has already occurred. The second is snap trap use over rodenticide. Poison-based rodent-controlled products do not remove the carcass. They create a dead animal at an unknown location inside the structure that must eventually be handled using the full wet method protocol, sometimes weeks later when the contamination risk is highest. Snap traps allow immediate carcass removal with full protective equipment before the body becomes a desiccated aerosolization source. The third is maintaining dated written records of any rodent evidence found and cleaned. As a clinical history your physician can reference if you develop any respiratory symptoms within 8 weeks of the exposure. That documentation is the difference between a physician who considers hantavirus on day 1 and one who considers it on day 5. The economic arithmetic of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome reduces to numbers that no preventive investment in this video comes close to matching. A certified N95 respirator costs between $1 and $3 per unit. A complete rodent exclusion and wet cleaning supply kit costs under $50 at any hardware retailer. The total cost of the 5-step protocol implemented once and maintained annually is under $100. Compare that to a single hantavirus hospitalization. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality reports the average intensive care unit admission in the United States costs between $3,000 and $10,000 per day. The average hantavirus pulmonary syndrome ICU stay for patients who survive is approximately 11 days, a minimum of $33,000 in hospital billing before pulmonary rehabilitation and follow-up respiratory therapy, which survivors of severe cases require for months to years afterward. Manufacturers of ECMO circuits, mechanical ventilator consumables, vasopressor infusions, and intensive care pharmaceuticals generate revenue from every hour a hantavirus patient spends in an ICU unit that a $20 investment in N95 masks could have made unnecessary. There is no pharmaceutical revenue event tied to a person who bought a box of masks, ventilated their garage for 30 minutes, and never needed intensive care. The financial infrastructure of the medical system was not built around that outcome. Right now, a 67-year-old man somewhere is planning his weekend. He is going to clear out the storage shed at the back of his property, the one that has been sealed since October. He noticed droppings along the baseboards when he opened it briefly last week. He is going to go back inside and get a broom. Press the like button right now. With your like, this video reaches 100,000 people, and somewhere in that number is someone who finds this video before Saturday and puts down the broom. Every week I release research your doctor did not have time to cover at your last appointment. Subscribe so you receive it. Share this with the adult over 60 in your life who has recently mentioned needing to clean out a garage, basement, or storage shed, and has no idea that task may require an N95 mask. Have you ever cleaned a rodent-contaminated space without any protective equipment? Yes or no in the comments. And I deliberately withheld one specific environmental condition that extends hantavirus particle viability inside a sealed space from days to months, something that turns a single weekend's risk into a season-long exposure window. Tell me in the comments if you want that covered next. The visuals in this video are AI-generated animations used only to illustrate the content. They do not affect the accuracy of anything presented here in any way. Every clinical reference, every statistic, and every protocol detail was personally reviewed by me before it became content. This channel exists for one reason: to give you the knowledge to walk into your next appointment with the right questions, because a routine visit does not always have time to cover every risk your situation carries. Dr. Jae Yoon. The science Asia has always known. Take care of yourself. I mean that.